My name is Eliza Thompson, and I am 32 years old, working as a compliance officer at Winston Financial Group. For 7 years, I have taken pride in my meticulous work that protects our company from millions in regulatory fines. But when my new manager, Richard, dismissed my expertise as just paperwork and denied my bonus, I had a decision to make. That decision ultimately froze a $321 million deal and brought our company to its knees. If you have ever been undervalued at work, give this video a like and subscribe. Let me show you how I turned being underappreciated into the most satisfying moment of my career. When I first joined Winston Financial Group 7 years ago, I was excited to put my regulatory compliance expertise to work at a larger firm. I had spent the previous 4 years at Meridian Associates, a smaller financial services company, where I had built a reputation as a detail-oriented professional who never missed a filing deadline or overlooked a reporting requirement. It was at Meridian that I discovered my talent for navigating the complex world of financial regulations, a skill that would later prove invaluable at Winston. At Winston Financial, my role as a compliance officer was straightforward but critical. I was responsible for maintaining all regulatory certificates, filing quarterly and annual reports with various government agencies, and ensuring every transaction the company engaged in met strict compliance standards. In the financial industry, these responsibilities might sound mundane to outsiders, but they are the invisible shields that protect companies from devastating fines, legal actions, and reputation damage. My previous manager, Martha Bennett, understood this perfectly. Martha had been at Winston for over 20 years and had seen firsthand what happened when compliance was neglected. She had witnessed competitor firms pay millions in fines and watched careers end over missed filings or improper documentation. Under Martha, our compliance department was respected throughout the company. She made sure executives understood our value, even if our work wasn't directly generating revenue. Revenue means nothing if penalties take it all away, Martha would say during executive meetings. She had a way of making our behind-the-scenes work seem heroic, and in many ways it was. We were the guardians of the company's reputation and financial stability. When Martha announced her retirement last year, I was genuinely sad to see her go. The farewell party was bittersweet, with many executives stopping by to express their appreciation for her years of service. I remember CEO Benjamin Walsh giving a heartfelt speech about Martha's contributions to the company's sterling compliance record. Little did I know that this respect for compliance work would leave with Martha. Her replacement, Richard Porter, came from the sales department. He had no background in compliance or regulatory affairs, but management thought his leadership skills would transfer well to our department. From day one, his attitude toward our work was dismissive. During his introduction to the team, he referred to compliance as a necessary evil and spoke about finding ways to streamline our processes to interfere less with the real business of making deals. The shift in our company culture became immediately apparent. Under the new leadership, Winston Financial began pursuing increasingly aggressive deal-making strategies. Our company, which had always been successful but conservative, was suddenly chasing bigger clients and more complex financial arrangements. This shift was largely driven by the announcement that we were pursuing a merger with Apex Capital, a rival firm with complementary client portfolios. The deal, valued at $321 million, would transform Winston into one of the top 10 financial services firms in the country. CEO Benjamin was particularly excited about the Apex deal. At every company meeting, he would update us on the progress of negotiations and stress how important this merger was for our future. "This is our moment," he would say, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "This deal will put Winston Financial on the map in a way we have never experienced before." The pressure to make the deal happen was intense and felt throughout every department. Sales teams were working overtime to ensure client retention post-merger. Marketing was developing new branding strategies. It was planning systems integration and compliance. We were expected to make sure everything went smoothly without getting in the way. Even in those early days, I had concerns about how quickly everything was moving. Mergers of this size typically required months of careful compliance work to ensure all regulatory requirements were met. But whenever I raised these concerns in meetings, Richard would cut me off with statements like, "We will cross that bridge when we come to it," or "Let the deal makers worry about the deal." I could feel the storm clouds gathering, but I had no idea just how dramatically things were about to change for me and for Winston Financial Group. The first day with Richard Porter as our new manager marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in our department. He called an all-hands meeting first thing in the morning, and as we gathered in the conference room, I noticed how he had already rearranged the furniture to place himself at the head of the table, a position Martha had never claimed, preferring to sit among us as an equal. "Let me be clear about how things will work moving forward," Richard began, not bothering with pleasantries. "Winston Financial makes money by closing deals and managing assets, not by pushing papers. Under my leadership, this department will support the revenue generators without creating unnecessary obstacles." I exchanged glances with my colleague Amanda Reed, who had been with the compliance department almost as long as I had. Her raised eyebrows told me she was thinking the same thing. This was going to be a problem. Richard continued his speech, explaining his background in sales, where he had consistently exceeded targets for 5 consecutive years. "In sales, we understand what really drives this business forward. We reward those who contribute directly to the bottom line, not those who simply check boxes on regulatory forms." That statement sent a clear message about how he valued our work, and it stung. In our department of 8 people, you could feel the tension rise. Jason Martinez, our junior compliance analyst, was practically shrinking in his chair. Thomas Blackwell, a new hire Richard had brought over from his previous department, was the only one nodding enthusiastically. After the meeting, Richard called me into his office. The walls were still bare, Martha's warm decor replaced by stacks of binders and a large whiteboard with sales targets written on it. "Eliza, I have been reviewing the department workflow," he said, without looking up from his computer. "It seems to me we have too many resources dedicated to routine filing work. I am reassigning some of your responsibilities to focus you on what matters." What followed was essentially a demotion. Richard stripped away my role in compliance strategy and advisory meetings with executive leadership, relegating me to managing paperwork and filings. Meanwhile, Thomas, who had 0 compliance experience, was given a newly created role of strategic compliance liaison that came with all my former responsibilities, plus a corner office. "But Richard," I protested, "those advisory meetings are crucial because they allow us to address compliance concerns before they become problems. Martha always said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." Richard leaned back in his chair and smiled condescendingly. "That is old school thinking, Eliza. The modern financial industry moves too quickly to wait for compliance to weigh in on every decision. Thomas will provide a more flexible perspective in those meetings." I left Richard's office feeling hollow. 7 years of building expertise and reputation erased in a 15-minute meeting. But I still had my core responsibilities, and I was determined to perform them with the same excellence I always had. The next few weeks were challenging, as we all adjusted to Richard's new regime. Our previously collaborative department became fragmented and competitive. Richard openly favored Thomas and the few team members who adapted to his compliance-light approach. Those of us who maintained Martha's standards of thoroughness were labeled obstructionists or too cautious. With the company's annual regulatory audit approaching, I found myself working longer hours than ever. Not only was I handling my own increased paperwork load, but I was quietly fixing problems created by Richard's restructuring. Essential compliance checks were being missed, documentation was incomplete, and reporting deadlines were in danger of being missed. One evening, staying late to prepare for the audit, I discovered several concerning discrepancies in documents submitted by the sales department. They had been using outdated disclosure forms for new clients, a violation that could trigger significant penalties if discovered by regulators. I spent the entire night updating the forms and backfiling the proper documentation. the next morning bleary-eyed from lack of sleep. I tried to explain to Richard what had happened. "You see, this is why we need proper compliance oversight in the sales process," I explained, showing him the corrected forms. "If this had gone unnoticed, we could have faced fines of up to $50,000 per violation." Richard barely glanced at the papers. "Good catch, I guess. But this is exactly why we have you handling the paperwork. Problem solved right, no harm, no foul." He completely missed the point that the problem should never have occurred in the first place if proper procedures had been followed. But more troubling was his dismissal of the potential consequences as if they were insignificant. As the weeks passed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Amanda remained an ally, but she was dealing with her own increased workload. Jason was trying to stay under the radar, afraid of becoming Richard's next target. Thomas and his growing circle of favorites regularly left early for happy hours, while the rest of us stayed late, fixing the compliance issues their carelessness created. Through office gossip and fragments of conversations I overheard, I learned more about the Apex Capital deal. The merger was moving forward rapidly, with teams working around the clock to finalize terms. What troubled me was hearing that compliance considerations were being left for last, treated as a formality rather than an essential component of the deal structure. During this time, I maintained detailed records of every compliance issue I identified and resolved. It was partly professional habit and partly a growing sense that I might need documentation to protect myself. Each night, as I updated my log of incidents prevented, I calculated the potential fines and penalties the company had avoided thanks to my diligence. By the end of the quarter, that number exceeded $2 million, more than 10 times my annual salary. Little did I know that this documentation would soon become the most valuable paperwork I had ever created. As the annual review period approached, I began preparing my performance documentation with even more care than usual. Under Martha, this process had been straightforward. We would submit a self-assessment highlighting our achievements, she would provide feedback, and then discuss appropriate compensation adjustments. Martha had always been fair, ensuring that the compliance team received bonuses comparable to other departments, recognizing our different but equally valuable contributions. With Richard now in charge, I knew I needed to make an irrefutable case for my value. I compiled a comprehensive report detailing every major compliance issue I had identified and resolved over the past year. Each entry included the date, the nature of the violation, the corrective action taken, and most importantly, the estimated financial penalty avoided. Among the most significant incidents were discovering that the Wealth Management Division was using non-compliant risk disclosure language in client communications, which I corrected before it triggered a regulatory investigation. Identifying a pattern of incomplete documentation in international transactions that could have resulted in anti-money laundering violations carrying penalties of up to $100,000 per occurrence. Catching and correcting discrepancies in quarterly SEC filings before submission, preventing potential securities violations. Ensuring proper licensing documentation for advisors operating across state lines, preventing potential suspension of business activities in 2 states. The total potential penalties avoided through my work alone exceeded $3 million. Even if the company had only faced a fraction of these penalties, my contribution to the bottom line was substantial. I felt confident that even Richard would have to acknowledge this value. On the day of my review, I arrived early, professionally dressed in my best navy blue suit, carrying a binder of supporting documentation. Richard kept me waiting outside his office for 45 minutes past our scheduled time, a power move that I recognized but refused to let bother me. When he finally called me in, he was typing on his phone and barely looked up. "Have a seat. This should not take long." I sat down, placing my binder on his desk. "I have prepared a comprehensive overview of my contributions this year." Richard glanced at the binder without touching it. "I am sure it is very thorough. You are good with paperwork that has never been in question." His tone made "good with paperwork" sound like a character flaw rather than a professional strength. "Actually," I said, opening the binder to my summary page, "this documents how my attention to regulatory compliance has directly saved the company from potential penalties exceeding $3 million this year alone." Richard leaned back in his chair. Those are hypothetical savings, Eliza. We cannot pay bonuses based on what might have happened. With all due respect, I countered compliance work is preventative by nature. The value is in what doesn't happen because we do our jobs correctly. Let me be direct, Richard said, finally putting down his phone. Your base performance has been adequate. You complete assigned tasks on time. But you have not demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and flexibility that adds real value to Winston Financial in our current growth phase. I was stunned. Strategic thinking, I have repeatedly raised important compliance considerations regarding the Apex merger that have been ignored. Flexibility, I have been working 60-hour weeks fixing compliance problems created by others while maintaining all my regular duties. Richard's expression hardened. Those extra hours were your choice, not a requirement. And your concerns about the Apex deal have been noted, but are not relevant to your performance evaluation. Then, what metrics are you using to evaluate my performance? I asked, struggling to keep my voice level. Richard slid a paper across the desk. It was a standard evaluation form with mostly meets expectations checked and a few needs improvement in categories like adaptability and strategic contribution. At the bottom was a 0% bonus recommendation. This cannot be right, I said, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. I have consistently exceeded expectations in all core compliance functions. My work has directly protected the company from significant financial penalties. Richard's response is one I will never forget. With a dismissive smirk, he said, I do not owe you a bonus for paperwork, Eliza. Anyone could do what you do. The words hit me like a physical blow. 7 years of dedication and expertise reduced to just paperwork that anyone could do. I felt my face flush with anger and humiliation. If that is your assessment, I think we are done here, I said, closing my binder and standing up. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing how deeply his words had hurt me. As I turned to leave, Richard added, Oh, and we will need you to sign off on the compliance certificates for the Apex deal by Friday. Thomas has reviewed everything and says it looks good, but your signature is still required as the designated officer on record. I nodded stiffly and left the office, making it to the restroom before the tears came. I locked myself in a stall, breathing deeply to regain my composure. I had never felt so undervalued and disrespected in my professional life. Amanda found me in the break room later, staring blankly into a cup of cold coffee. That bad, huh? She asked, sitting down across from me. I told her everything, including Richard's parting comment about needing my signature on the Apex deal certificates. That is beyond unfair, Amanda said, outraged on my behalf. If anyone deserves recognition around here, it is you. Maybe you should talk to HR or even Benjamin directly. I shook my head. Benjamin is completely focused on the Apex merger, and HR reports to the executive team, who all seem to share Richard's view that compliance is just an annoying checkbox. So what are you going to do? Amanda asked. I considered the question carefully. I am not sure yet, but I just realized something important. All of our compliance certificates require my signature as the designated officer. The company literally cannot certify regulatory compliance without me. Amanda's eyes widened slightly, including the Apex deal certificates. I nodded slowly, a realization dawning. Yes. And those certificates expire this Friday if not renewed. So theoretically, Amanda said carefully, if those certificates are not renewed, the deal would be non-compliant, I finished. It would trigger an automatic regulatory review and potentially freeze the entire transaction. We looked at each other in silence, both understanding the implications. I was not the type of person who would deliberately sabotage my company. But for the first time, I realized I had leverage that Richard and the others had failed to recognize. As I walked back to my desk, I noticed an email announcing a celebration for the sales team to recognize their work on the Apex deal. No compliance staff were included on the invitation list. Looking at my calendar, I saw the reminder to renew the compliance certificates for the Apex transaction The system was set up to automatically flag expired certificates to our regulators, a fail-safe that Martha had implemented years ago to prevent accidental non-compliance. I sat there for a long time, contemplating what to do next. Part of me wanted to just sign the renewal as always, swallow my pride and move on. But another part, a part I rarely acknowledged, wanted Richard and the others to understand that compliance wasn't just paperwork. It was the foundation that allowed all their deals to exist in the first place. By the end of the day, I had made my decision. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. For my profession, my expertise, and myself. Friday morning arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Today was the deadline for renewing the compliance certificates for the Apex deal. The digital renewal form sat in my inbox, requiring only my electronic signature to maintain our compliance status. I had spent a sleepless night weighing my options, my mind cycling through potential outcomes. The office was buzzing with excitement about the merger. Sales representatives were already discussing commission structures. IT personnel were planning system integrations. Marketing had mock-ups of new branding materials displayed in the creative department. Meanwhile, Richard had organized a celebratory lunch for the deal team, exclusively sales personnel and executives, with compliance notably absent from the guest list. I watched from my cubicle as they departed for an expensive steakhouse downtown Champaign Corks, already popping before they even left the building. At precisely noon, I made my decision. I closed the email with the renewal form without signing it. Then I opened our compliance management system and documented my decision with a simple note, renewal pending review of potential regulatory concerns. It was technically accurate. I did have concerns, and it created a paper trail that protected me from accusations of simple negligence. Our system was programmed to automatically flag expired certificates to regulatory authorities after a 24-hour grace period. Once that happened, there would be no turning back. The clock was now ticking. I left the office at my normal time, neither early nor late. I wanted everything to appear routine, but as I drove home, I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. For once, my paperwork would demonstrate its true importance. The next morning, I received an urgent text from Amanda, external auditor in office. Emergency meeting called. Everyone looking for you. I arrived at the office to find it in chaos. Marcus Johnston, our external compliance auditor, had arrived for what was supposed to be a routine quarterly check. Instead, he had found our compliance certificate for the Apex deal flagged as expired in the system. The conference room was filled with tense executives when I arrived. Richard was pacing at the front of the room, his face flushed. Chief Financial Officer Jennifer Larson sat stone-faced at the table. Thomas looked positively ill. The only person missing was CEO Benjamin, who was on vacation in the Maldives. Marcus Johnston sat calmly at the head of the table, a folder open before him. He nodded slightly as I entered. "Ah, Miss Thompson. Good. Now we can begin," he said, his voice measured and professional. The room fell silent as Marcus held up our compliance certificate. "This is the primary compliance verification for the Winston Apex merger transaction, valued at approximately $321 million. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "It lists Eliza Thompson as the designated officer for compliance certification." Richard interrupted. "Yes, and she was supposed to renew it yesterday. This is clearly a—" Marcus held up his hand, silencing Richard. "I am not finished." He turned the certificate so everyone could see it. "The status of this certificate is now listed as expired, as of midnight last night." He slid the certificate across the table toward me and said one word, "Explain." All eyes turned to me. The weight of that moment was enormous, but strangely, I felt calmer than I had in months. "The certificate expired because I did not renew it," I said simply. Richard exploded. "This is completely unprofessional. You have deliberately sabotaged a major transaction. This is grounds for immediate termination." Jennifer raised her hand to quiet Richard. "Eliza, we need to understand why you did not renew the certificate. Was it an oversight? A technical issue? I maintained my professional composure. It was neither an oversight nor a technical issue. As the designated officer, I am legally responsible for certifying that all regulatory requirements have been met. I was not satisfied that proper compliance review had been conducted for this transaction, and therefore could not in good conscience provide certification. Richard's face turned an even deeper shade of red. This is absurd. Thomas reviewed everything. He said it was fine. I turned to Thomas, who suddenly found his notepad fascinating. Thomas has been with the compliance department for less than 6 months and has no prior compliance experience. He is not qualified to make that determination, nor is he the designated officer on record. Marcus nodded. Miss Thompson is correct. The regulatory framework is quite clear. Only the registered designated officer may certify compliance. It is a position of significant legal responsibility. Jennifer looked alarmed. What exactly does this mean for the Apex deal? Marcus closed his folder. As of now, the transaction is frozen pending a full compliance review. All integration activities must cease immediately. If the compliance issues are not resolved within 30 days, the regulatory authorities may open a formal investigation which could potentially void the transaction entirely. The room erupted into chaos. Executives began talking over one another, some demanding my immediate firing, others questioning how this could have happened. Through it all, Richard glared at me with undisguised hatred. Jennifer eventually restored order. Marcus, what exactly needs to happen to reinstate the certificate and unfreeze the deal? A full compliance review by the designated officer with all documentation properly filed and all regulatory requirements verifiably met, Marcus replied. Given the size and complexity of this transaction that typically requires 2 to 3 weeks of dedicated work, We do not have 2 to 3 weeks, Richard shouted. Benjamin is expecting this deal to close by the end of the month. Then I suggest you begin the process immediately, Marcus said, gathering his papers. I will need to file a report with the regulatory authority by the end of day. I would be happy to note that corrective measures are already underway if that is indeed the case. After Marcus left, Richard dismissed everyone except me. When we were alone in the conference room, he leaned across the table, his voice a threatening whisper. You think you are clever, do not you? Using your little paperwork trick to hold this company hostage, you will never work in this industry again when I am done with you. I met his gaze steadily. It is not a trick, Richard. It is the law. And it exists precisely to prevent the kind of corner-cutting you have been encouraging. Fix this, he hissed. Sign the certificate now, and maybe, just maybe, you will still have a job tomorrow. I cannot simply sign it, I explained, maintaining my calm. That would constitute fraud. A proper review must be conducted, documentation must be verified, and regulatory requirements must be met. That is the only legal way forward. Richard slammed his fist on the table. This is because I did not give you a bonus, is it not? This petty revenge will cost you everything. I stood up. This is about doing my job properly. The job that you dismissed as just paperwork. A job that, as today has demonstrated, is essential to this company's ability to function. As I walked toward the door, Richard called after me. Benjamin will be back tomorrow. We will see what he has to say about your little power play. I turned back one last time. I look forward to it. Because, unlike you, I suspect Benjamin actually understands the value of proper compliance. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. I had just put my entire career on the line. But for the first time in months, I had also stood up for my value and expertise. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done the right thing. The aftermath of the meeting sent shockwaves through Winston Financial. Word spread quickly that the Apex deal, the crown jewel of our company's strategy, was in jeopardy. The sales team that had been celebrating just the day before now huddled in corners, whispering anxiously about commission structures and job security. IT halted their integration planning. Marketing quietly removed the new branding materials from display. I returned to my desk to find several colleagues from other departments staring at me with a mix of awe and apprehension. Being the person who froze a $321 million deal made me simultaneously the most powerful and most vulnerable employee in the building. Amanda stopped by my cubicle, keeping her voice low. "Are you okay? That was the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do here. Ask me tomorrow if it was brave or just career suicide," I replied, attempting a smile that did not quite reach my eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I do exactly what I said I would do. I conduct a proper compliance review of the Apex deal document, everything meticulously, and determine what needs to be fixed before certification can be granted." I had barely started gathering the necessary files when Jennifer Larson, our CFO, appeared at my desk. "Eliza, could I see you in my office, please?" Her tone was measured, giving no hint of whether I was about to be fired or commended. Jennifer's office was a study in elegant minimalism, with views of the city skyline and a desk clear of everything except a laptop and a single folder. She gestured for me to take a seat across from her. "I will be direct," she began after closing the door. "The situation with the Apex deal has created significant complications for Winston Financial. Benjamin is cutting his vacation short and will be back tomorrow. Before he arrives, I need to understand exactly what happened and what it will take to resolve this issue." I appreciated her businesslike approach. The compliance certificate expired because proper regulatory review procedures were not followed. Under Martha Bennett's leadership, major transactions underwent rigorous compliance assessment throughout the process. Under Richard, compliance has been treated as an afterthought, a box to check at the very end. Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "And you believe this creates actual regulatory risk, not just procedural concerns?" "Absolutely," I affirmed. "I have identified at least 7 areas where the current transaction structure may violate regulatory requirements. Each of these could trigger penalties or, worse, nullify the entire transaction if discovered by authorities during a review." Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly. 7 distinct issues. Can you be more specific?" I opened my notebook and outlined each concern clearly and concisely, from improper client disclosure procedures to potential licensing issues in 3 states where Apex operated. As I spoke, Jennifer took notes, occasionally asking sharp, insightful questions that revealed she understood the regulatory landscape better than I had assumed. When I finished, she sat back and studied me for a moment. "Why did you not bring these concerns to my attention earlier?" "I tried to raise them through proper channels," I explained. "I documented each issue and submitted them to Richard as department policy requires. He dismissed them as excessive caution and said Thomas had reviewed everything and found no significant concerns." Jennifer's expression darkened. "I never saw any of these reports." "Richard was supposed to include compliance concerns in his executive summaries," I said. "If you did not see them, then he chose not to forward them." Jennifer was silent for a moment, then opened her desk drawer and removed several folders. "I have here your performance reviews for the past 3 years, including the most recent one with Richard. The contrast is striking. Martha consistently rated you as exceptional, while Richard has downgraded nearly every category." She looked up at me. "And he recommended 0 bonus despite what appears to be continued excellent work. He told me he does not owe me a bonus for paperwork." I said, the words still stinging as I repeated them. "He said anyone could do what I do." "Today's events suggest otherwise," Jennifer remarked dryly. "It seems your paperwork has the power to halt a $321 million transaction." For the first time, I felt someone in leadership genuinely understood the value of my work. "Compliance isn't just about paperwork," I said earnestly. "It is about protecting the company, our clients, and ultimately, our reputation. When done properly, no one notices because nothing goes wrong. It is only when it fails that everyone suddenly realizes its importance." Jennifer nodded. Like oxygen, no one thinks about it until it is gone. She closed the folders. "Eliza, what would it take to properly review and certify this deal as compliant?" 2 weeks of focused work with cooperation from all departments," I replied without hesitation. I would need access to all transaction documents, client communications, and regulatory filings. And most importantly, I would need authority to require necessary changes if I identify compliance issues. And if you do not get that authority, then I cannot ethically certify compliance and the deal remains frozen. Jennifer studied me for a long moment. You understand that standing your ground on this could cost you your job. Yes, I admitted. But certifying compliance without proper review could cost me my professional license and potentially expose me to personal legal liability. Some lines simply cannot be crossed. To my surprise, Jennifer smiled slightly. I respect that. Too few people in finance remember that regulations exist for good reasons. She stood up. I will speak with Benjamin as soon as he returns. In the meantime, begin your review process and document everything. You will have my support for access to any materials you need. As I left Jennifer's office, I felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in months. At least one executive understood the importance of what I was doing. The next morning, the office was buzzing with the news that CEO Benjamin Walsh had returned and called an emergency board meeting. I tried to focus on my compliance review, but it was difficult with the weight of uncertainty hanging over my future. At 11 o'clock, I received a message to report to the main boardroom immediately. As I walked down the corridor, I mentally prepared my defense, determined to stand firm on the importance of proper compliance procedures, regardless of the consequences. The boardroom was imposing with floor-to-ceiling windows and a massive table that seated 20. When I entered, I found Benjamin at the head of the table looking tired from his hastily abbreviated vacation. Jennifer sat to his right with several board members present either in person or via video conference. Richard was there too, his expression, a mixture of anger and smugness, clearly expecting my imminent dismissal. Eliza, please take a seat, Benjamin said, his tone giving nothing away. We have been discussing the situation with the Apex deal. Richard immediately jumped in. Benjamin, as I was explaining this, was a deliberate act of sabotage in retaliation for a performance review. We should proceed with termination and have legal examine options for recovering damages. Benjamin held up his hand to silence Richard. I have heard your perspective, Richard. Now I would like to hear from Eliza directly. He turned to me. Can you explain why our $321 million deal is currently frozen? I took a deep breath and spoke clearly. The compliance certificate expired because I could not ethically certify that all regulatory requirements had been met without conducting a proper review. Under the current department leadership, compliance has been treated as a formality rather than an essential component of our business operations. She is exaggerating, Richard interrupted. Thomas reviewed everything and found no issues. Thomas has been in compliance for less than 6 months, I countered. And with all due respect, his review consisted of a cursory check of documentation without substantive evaluation of regulatory requirements. I opened my folder and placed several documents on the table. These are reports I filed with Richard over the past 3 months, detailing specific compliance concerns with the Apex transaction. None of these were addressed, and based on what Jennifer told me yesterday, none were forwarded to the executive team. Benjamin picked up the reports and scanned them, his expression growing increasingly concerned. These raised substantial issues. Richard, why was I not made aware of these? Richard shifted uncomfortably. They seemed overly cautious. Eliza has a tendency to see problems where there are none. Is that why you denied her bonus? Benjamin asked sharply. For being thorough in protecting the company from regulatory risk. Richard's face reddened. Her performance did not warrant a bonus. Compliance is a support function, not a revenue generator. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. It seems to me that compliance has just demonstrated its power to affect revenue quite dramatically. He turned back to me. Eliza, in your professional opinion, what is required to resolve this situation? I outlined my plan for a comprehensive review, emphasizing that it was not about creating obstacles, but ensuring the deal's long-term success and legal standing. When I finished, Benjamin looked around the table. Does anyone have a better solution that does not involve asking Miss Thompson to potentially violate regulatory requirements? The room was silent. Benjamin nodded decisively. Then, effective immediately, Eliza will lead a special compliance task force with direct reporting to myself and the board. Richard, your department will provide all necessary support. Jennifer will oversee the process and ensure Eliza has whatever resources she needs. Richard started to protest, but Benjamin cut him off. And Richard, we will discuss your performance management approach separately. I find it disturbing that critical compliance concerns were hidden from the executive team. As the meeting concluded and people began to file out, Benjamin called out, "Eliza, could you stay behind for a moment?" When we were alone in the boardroom, Benjamin looked at me with a mix of frustration and respect. You know, when they woke me up in the Maldives with news that our deal was frozen, I was ready to fire whoever was responsible. He shook his head. Then Jennifer sent me copies of your reports and your recent performance review. He leaned forward. I am not happy about the delay to our deal, but I am even less happy about the way your expertise has been devalued. Martha always said you were the backbone of our compliance program. I should have paid more attention when Richard began changing the department structure. I wasn't sure how to respond, but Benjamin wasn't finished. Jennifer told me what Richard said to you about not deserving a bonus for paperwork. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Please tell me you paid her," repeating the question he had apparently asked Richard earlier. "No, sir," I replied. He did not. Benjamin shook his head. "That will be rectified immediately. Now, how quickly can we get this deal back on track without compromising our regulatory standing?" For the first time in months, I felt my expertise was truly valued. Give me 2 weeks with the right support, and I will have everything properly reviewed and documented. Any issues we find can be addressed concurrently. You have it, Benjamin said. And Eliza, thank you for having the courage to do the right thing even when it was difficult. Not many would have risked their job to protect the company's integrity. As I left the boardroom, I realized that sometimes standing up for your value requires allowing others to discover how essential you truly are. The paperwork that Richard had dismissed so casually had just demonstrated its power to shape the future of our entire company. The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my professional career. Benjamin had given me temporary authority to lead what was now officially called the Apex Compliance Task Force, with team members pulled from various departments. Even Richard was instructed to provide any support I requested, though he did so with thinly veiled resentment. I established our headquarters in a large conference room that we quickly transformed into a command center. The walls became covered with flowcharts, mapping regulatory requirements and tracking our progress. Color-coded folders organized the mountains of documentation we needed to review. I instituted daily morning briefings to coordinate our efforts and afternoon wrap-ups to address any issues that arose. Jennifer proved to be an invaluable ally. True to her word, she ensured I had access to every resource needed, from additional staff to specialized legal consultations. When certain departments were slow to provide requested information, a single call from Jennifer's office would magically clear the bottleneck. The task itself was monumental. The Apex deal touched on regulations from 7 different agencies across multiple jurisdictions. Each aspect required meticulous review: client asset transfers, advisor licensing disclosure requirements, anti-money laundering, provisions, privacy protections, and dozens of other compliance areas. As our work progressed, we uncovered exactly what I had feared: numerous compliance issues that could have triggered regulatory penalties or even invalidated the transaction. Most were the result of rushing the deal without proper compliance oversight. Some were minor and easily corrected. Others required substantial restructuring of certain aspects of the transaction. Thomas, who had been so confident in his cursory review, was shocked by the depth of our analysis. I had no idea there were so many regulatory layers to consider, he admitted, after observing our process for several days. Richard told me to just check if the paperwork was complete, not to evaluate the substance. On the third day, Benjamin stopped by our command center to check on progress. He spent nearly an hour reviewing our findings and asking thoughtful questions. When I showed him a particular issue that could have triggered a $5 million penalty, if left uncorrected, he shook his head in disbelief. "How did we almost miss this?" he asked. "Because compliance was treated as an afterthought instead of an integral part of the deal structure," I explained. "Martha always insisted that compliance be involved from the beginning of any major transaction. That practice was abandoned under Richard's leadership." Benjamin nodded thoughtfully. "A mistake that will not be repeated." By the end of the first week, it became clear that Richard's position had become untenable. He was conspicuously absent from our daily executive briefings, and rumors circulated that he had been reassigned to a special project with no direct reports. Finally, on Monday of the second week, Benjamin announced a reorganization of the compliance department. Richard would be returning to sales while I was appointed interim compliance director, reporting directly to Jennifer. That same day, I found an envelope on my temporary desk in the command center. Inside was a check representing the bonus I had been denied, along with back pay and a handwritten note from Benjamin Paperwork that saves millions is worth every penny. "Thank you for your integrity." The validation was sweet, but I remained focused on our primary goal, completing a thorough compliance review of the Apex deal and resolving any issues. My team worked tirelessly, often late into the evening. Amanda proved herself invaluable managing the documentation process with remarkable efficiency. Even Jason found his confidence taking ownership of the licensing review and identifying several critical issues that needed correction. By the end of the second week, we had addressed every compliance concern, restructured problematic aspects of the deal, and prepared comprehensive documentation for regulatory review. On Friday afternoon, I personally reviewed the final compliance certificate, verifying that every requirement had been properly met and documented. With a sense of both relief and pride, I electronically signed the certificate as designated officer, officially reinstating our compliance status. Within minutes, Marcus Johnston, our external auditor, confirmed receipt of the certification and removed the regulatory hold on the transaction. The atmosphere in the office shifted dramatically. The anxiety that had permeated every corner gave way to renewed excitement. Sales teams resumed client discussions with confidence. It restarted integration planning. Marketing once again displayed their new branding materials. Benjamin called an all-hands meeting to announce that the Apex deal was back on track, specifically acknowledging the compliance team's crucial role in saving the transaction. "This experience has taught us a valuable lesson," he told the assembled staff. "Compliance is not just a support function or a box to check. It is the foundation that allows all our business activities to proceed safely and legally. Moving forward, compliance considerations will be integrated into every phase of our operations from initial planning through execution." For me personally, the most significant change was in how others perceived my role. Colleagues who had previously viewed compliance as an obstacle now sought my input proactively. Executives who had barely acknowledged me in the hallway stopped to ask questions about regulatory implications of their strategies. My expertise, previously dismissed as just paperwork, was now recognized as essential business knowledge. The following Monday, Jennifer called me to her office for what I assumed would be a routine update meeting. Instead, I found both her and Benjamin waiting for me. Eliza, Benjamin began. "We have been discussing the future structure of our compliance function. The Apex situation demonstrated that we need not just a department, but a comprehensive compliance program integrated throughout the organization." Jennifer continued. "We would like to create a new position, Chief Compliance Officer, with a seat on the Executive Committee and direct reporting to the board's Risk Management Committee." Benjamin smiled. "And we would like to offer you this position with appropriate compensation and resources to build a team that reflects the importance of this function." I was momentarily speechless. Chief Compliance Officer was a career achievement I had hoped to reach eventually, perhaps in another 5 to 10 years. "This is unexpected," I managed finally. "Is it?" Jennifer asked. You just saved a $321 million deal that the entire company had been working toward for months. You identified regulatory issues that could have cost us millions in penalties. And you had the courage to stand firm on your principles even when it put your job at risk. I cannot think of anyone better qualified. The offer came with a compensation package that doubled my previous salary and included a substantial signing bonus equity in the company and a guaranteed annual bonus structure tied to compliance program effectiveness. More importantly, it included authority to build a properly resourced department with direct input into all major business decisions. I accepted the position, of course. Within days, I was moved to a corner office on the executive floor and began the process of restructuring our compliance function. Amanda was promoted to compliance director, reporting directly to me. Jason became our senior analyst with a significant raise and expanded responsibilities. The Apex deal officially closed 3 weeks later, with all regulatory approvals secured. At the closing dinner, Benjamin raised a toast to the power of paperwork and the people who make it meaningful. The room erupted in applause as all eyes turned to me. Richard, who had been moved to a regional sales role in another state, sent a terse congratulatory email that I suspected had been mandated by HR. Thomas, to his credit, requested to remain in the compliance department, acknowledging that he had much to learn. I assigned him to work directly with Amanda, who would ensure he received proper training in regulatory requirements. As we completed the integration of Apex into Winston Financial over the following months, our new approach to compliance became a competitive advantage. Clients appreciated our thoroughness and attention to regulatory detail. Regulators noted our improved documentation and proactive approach to compliance issues. Even our competitors began to take notice, with several reaching out to learn more about our integrated compliance model. The painful experience of being undervalued had ultimately led to transformation not just for me personally, but for the entire organization. What Richard had dismissed as just paperwork had proven to be the linchpin of our most significant business transaction. And in recognizing that value, Winston Financial had become a stronger, more resilient institution. 6 months after the Apex deal closed, Winston Financial Group had transformed in ways I never could have imagined when this journey began. The merger had indeed made us one of the top 10 financial services firms in the country, but it was our approach to compliance that truly set us apart from competitors. My role as Chief Compliance Officer had evolved from simply enforcing regulations to helping shape the strategic direction of the company. Compliance was no longer an afterthought, but a competitive advantage we proudly marketed to clients and partners. Integrity by design became our new tagline, reflecting the integration of compliance considerations into every aspect of our business. The compliance department itself had grown from 8 people to 23, with specialized teams focused on different regulatory areas. I took particular pride in mentoring junior compliance officers, sharing not just technical knowledge, but the importance of standing firm on principles, even when it is difficult. My relationship with Benjamin had developed into one of mutual respect and trust. He regularly sought my input on strategic decisions, valuing my perspective on regulatory implications, as well as ethical considerations. "You saved us from ourselves," he once remarked during a board meeting. "That is the true value of strong compliance leadership." Jennifer had become both a mentor and friend, helping me navigate the politics of the executive suite and advocating for compliance initiatives that required significant investment. Under her guidance, we implemented a new compensation structure that rewarded compliance excellence throughout the organization, ensuring that everyone understood its value. Richard eventually left Winston Financial entirely unable to adapt to the new culture that valued compliance as highly as sales. I heard through industry contacts that he had joined a smaller firm with a more traditional view of compliance as a necessary evil rather than a strategic asset. While I wished him no ill will, I could not help but feel that his departure had been for the best. Thomas, somewhat surprisingly, had embraced the opportunity to learn proper compliance practices and was developing into a competent analyst. I never understood what I did not know he admitted during his 6-month review. Richard had me convinced that compliance was just checking boxes. Now I see it is about protecting everything we value. The most rewarding aspect of the transformation was watching the culture change throughout Winston Financial. Employees who had once viewed compliance as an obstacle now sought guidance proactively. Sales teams included compliance considerations in their initial client discussions. Product development incorporated regulatory requirements from the design phase, rather than as an afterthought. My healing journey had not been instantaneous. The initial pain of being dismissed as just a paper pusher had cut deep. The vindication of proving my value had been satisfying, but also somewhat bittersweet, knowing it had taken a crisis to make others see what should have been obvious all along. But over time, I had grown beyond both the pain and the vindication. What remained was a deeper understanding that my self-worth did not depend on others recognizing my value. I had always known the importance of my work even when those around me did not. The crisis had not changed that truth. It had merely made it visible to others. This realization was perhaps the most important lesson of my journey. True confidence comes not from external validation, but from knowing your own worth. When Richard told me he did not owe me a bonus for paperwork, he had intended to diminish me. Instead, he had inadvertently given me the opportunity to demonstrate my true value in the most powerful way possible. That lesson extended beyond my professional life. In relationships, in community, in all aspects of life, knowing your worth gives you the strength to stand firm when it matters most. Not out of pride or stubbornness, but out of a genuine commitment to what you know is right. Sometimes you need to let something freeze before it can be rebuilt stronger. The painful decision to allow the Apex deal to be temporarily frozen had ultimately led to a more robust, compliant, and sustainable merger. Similarly, the freezing of my career advancement under Richard had created the conditions for much greater growth than might otherwise have been possible. As I look back on that pivotal moment when I decided not to renew the compliance certificate, I realize it was not about revenge or even justice. It was about integrity, about refusing to compromise on principles that existed for good reason. And in standing firm on those principles, I had not only salvaged my own career, but helped transform an entire organization. So if you find yourself in a situation where your contributions are dismissed as just paperwork or your expertise is undervalued, remember this. Know your worth, stand your ground, and have the courage to let things freeze if that is what integrity requires. The thaw that follows may create possibilities you never imagined possible. Have you ever had to stand up for your value when others did not see it? Comment below with your story. I would love to hear how you handled it. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their work matters even when others do not recognize it yet. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the paperwork is what holds everything together.